If you're a founder of a growing company and you have this feeling that even though your team used to work brilliantly together, there are more and more unspoken tensions, friction, and quiet conflicts just waiting for the least convenient moment to blow up in your face, then this episode is for you. My name is Agnieszka Jurczyk. I work with founders in periods of fast growth when the company gets too complex for goodwill and people liking each other to be enough. And when the absence of clear structures starts costing real relationships, energy, and actual results. In today's episode of Founder to Zero, I'll explain why team conflicts rarely come from personality clashes and far more often from gaps in accountability, poorly defined roles, or ambiguous expectations, and how to prevent them systematically before they turn into politics, closed off silos, and open turf wars. Let's go, shall we? Adam clicks join. Only 3 minutes late, and he already knows something is very wrong. Because this is not a technology problem, he hears the CTO say. Adam has known Maggie since secondary school, and he knows perfectly well that her calm voice has nothing to do with calm. It's the silence before the storm. The model is performing better than ever, Maggie continues. The numbers are undeniable. The head of sales cuts in before those numbers even appear on the screen. Customers are leaving after a month. I'm running out of people to sell to. Adam stares at the screen in disbelief. He feels like he missed not 3 minutes, but 3 entire seasons. What did I miss? He cuts in after a moment. Silence. Finally, Pete takes a deep breath and gets it all out. We're delivering ARR. We have 80% growth year on year, but I'm spending more time rescuing churn than closing new business. This is not sustainable. Adam nods. He's heard this before. Pete always groans about every target and then just delivers it anyway. Pete continues. We're selling on product quality. That's the strategy. So the client buys on quality. Then, a week later, they're telling my people the system is too complicated, too slow, not intuitive enough. And they leave. And all I keep hearing from Maggie is that it's not a technology problem. The CTO responds immediately, because it isn't. When it comes to technology quality, we're delivering at the best level in the company history. Prediction accuracy is at record high. Last month, we cut response time by 20% on the same compute capacity with 15% more traffic. Charts appear on the screen. Adam looks at the colored lines. They're all going in the right direction. Maggie continues. Most of the customers who leave never reach the point where they've used the model even once. The ones who do get there stay. Here are the numbers. More charts appear on the screen. Adam frowns. What do you mean they don't reach the model? But it's as if no one hears the question. Are we definitely selling to the right people? Asks the CTO. Actually, a reasonable question, Adam thinks. Sales smirks crookedly. We are selling to the right people. Those right people are getting stuck in onboarding. They get lost in the interface. You have no idea how many times this month I've heard, Peter, this is not what you sold us. But this is not a technology problem, the CTO interjects, visibly irritated. I'm responsible for tech, and tech is working. Adam feels the first sting of unease. The product is basically technology. Well, 95% technology. Churn is your KPI, sales fires back. Yes, the CTO answers. Churn caused by technology. If the model were the problem, I'd be the first to own it, and I'd be grinding in the code through the night. You know me. Customers are leaving. Do you hear me? Pete cuts in. I'm spending half of my day on the phone like a call center rep trying to save each one. Day in, day out. How long can this go on? Pete, how am I supposed to help you? The CTO asks rhetorically. We don't have CX. We don't have a product owner for the whole thing. UX lives in marketing because that's where the only designer is. We get the roadmap from you. You haven't given me even 5% of our sprint capacity to work on the technical debt that's causing the too slow problem. I've been saying for months that if we don't get out of all those duct tape and string MVPs we wrote on the fly 6 years ago because we had to be quick, all of it is going to grind to a halt. And then there's no company. Adam opens his mouth and closes it before anything comes out. Pete leans towards the camera. If I stop selling, there's no company either. Adam tries to interrupt them, but no one reacts. So what? Should I just stop selling? And am I supposed to keep pretending that a system built on MVPs written for a handful of clients can handle hundreds of them? They're no longer looking at Adam. They're looking at each other like enemies. Well, if that's how it is, says Pete, I don't know how we're supposed to be working together. Sorry, but this conversation is completely pointless. And he turns off his camera. If that's the case, adds Maggie, then I don't know either. And she disappears from the screen as well. Adam sits motionless, staring at the two black rectangles. These are people he built this company with, from scratch. They've known each other for years. They always used to pull in the same direction. And now, they might as well be speaking different languages. How could it have gone so wrong? But it could be different. Picture the same morning, same item in the calendar, and with the same 3-minute delay, Adam clicks join. But this time, no one is looking at anyone with daggers. The head of ops is calmly summarizing the data, also visible on the screen. We have 38% churn in the first 30 days. We've broken it down, and 68% drop off during onboarding. Of those, more than a half before they've even reached the prediction model. 19% are clearly wrong fit from the sales side, 11% are performance issues, and the rest can be set aside. So it looks like we have 3 priority areas: onboarding, targeting, and performance. The head of ops moves to the next chart. On onboarding, I asked customer success to run exit interviews with that cohort. The main issue appears to be an overly complex interface. We're currently managing it through manual support, but that's not sustainable in the long run. We need to simplify that interface. The CTO responds calmly. We'll build whatever is needed, only until the next round I don't have budget for CX, so we'll need someone to clearly spec what that interface should look like before we hand it to the developer. The head of ops nods. Okay, customer success will collect and summarize feedback from the support calls. And can you handle wireframes with the designer? Asks the CTO. The head of ops pauses for a second. I don't really have anyone for that, but okay, I'll take it on. Thanks, nods the CTO. In the meantime, I'll look at the performance, though I can already see that we'll need to come back to the technical debt question. The 5% we have allocated for it in the roadmap is clearly not enough. I'll send you a calendar invite for Monday. Think between now and then which tickets we can push to the backlog and at what cost. Sales looks up from his notes. I think we'll have some room on our side. I'll send you a few proposals. And I'll go through the targeting with marketing because that 19% is definitely too high. Adam finally joins in. Do you need anything from me? Head of Ops glances at the calendar and smiles slightly. Not really, no. I only added you as optional. The call ends with a specific action plan and a follow-up scheduled for the following week. And Adam only realizes a moment later that the conversation has already finished and the conflict never even started. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. How to make it so that conflicts don't even get started. Before we go further, a quick ask. If what I'm talking about here resonates with where you are right now and you'd like to hear more, hit subscribe. A thumbs up on this video would also mean a lot. In return, I'll keep making more content about how to scale a business without losing your mind along the way. Thank you for every bit of support. There's a myth about conflict that does more damage in companies than even the most glaring lack of competence. It's the belief that conflict starts with people, that it comes from difficult personalities, from ego, from immaturity, from oversized ambitions, from people who just don't get along. And that's exactly why, when tension appears in a team, most founders think, I need to reconcile them somehow. But who should I silence? Or, I need to read up on being a better mediator. The thing is, in 90% of cases, if not more, conflict doesn't start with people at all. It starts with the system those people are operating in, with the fact that different people have conflicting KPIs. They're responsible for the same outcome, but from different sides. Or they are not entirely clear where their accountability ends and someone else's begins. And then something very human happens. Everyone does their job to the best of their ability. Everyone optimizes for their own goals. And everyone is right. Their own kind of right. And you end up in a situation where, as they say, ask two people the same question and you'll get three different answers. Because at first glance, you can't see that their areas of accountability are simply badly stitched together. Sometimes they overlap, and sometimes there's a gaping hole between them, and everyone is convinced that it's not a hole, it's just the other person's area. As a result, the conflict looks personal when in reality it's structural. And that's exactly why phrases like just sort it out between yourselves, or you need to play as a team, or think about the company, not just yourselves, simply don't work. Because they're trying to fix emotions when the problem goes deeper. Emotions are the symptom, not the root cause. The problem that needs fixing lies in the architecture of the company, in the accountability structure, in the interfaces between roles, and in who is really responsible for what and who has real influence over what. So if we want to prevent team conflicts, it's not enough to make sure things are pleasant. We need to make sure that accountability architecture in the company is built in such a way that conflict has nowhere to start. So let's get to the root of that. As I mentioned, the source of conflict is rarely emotions. Emotions are just the symptom. The source of conflict almost always lies in one of 6 systemic shortcomings. But before I name them, I want to make one very important point. In fast-growing companies, these shortcomings appear almost universally. Not because you're not on top of things as a founder. None at all. They appear because when you're building a startup, especially one that's growing really fast, you're not only building the product in MVP mode, but you're building the management system in MVP mode as well. The fact that conflicts are appearing in your team is nothing more than a signal that your management system's MVP simply needs an upgrade. So, what are these 6 shortcomings? The first one is unclear accountability. In practice, this can look like no single end-to-end owner of a key process, shared responsibility for the whole instead of clear ownership of specific parts, no man's land between teams, or accountability assigned by default but never really communicated explicitly. Because when accountability is blurred, conflict appears precisely where one person's scope ends and someone else's should have begins. That's when success has many fathers and failure is always an orphan. Everyone feels attacked because everyone feels they did what was theirs to do. And when people feel attacked, everyone focuses on deflecting blame instead of finding solutions. And the result is that you as founder become the court of last resort with hundreds of cases on the docket and no time for a deeper analysis of the files. Not the greatest environment for delivering fair verdicts. Reason 2. Unclear decision authority. People either don't know who can actually make a call, so they come for a decision to you, or you have multiple people who are each utterly convinced that decision belongs exclusively to them. In that system, every conversation turns into a fight for influence. And despite appearances, these are not interpersonal conflicts. They are conflicts about the ability to make decisions that people feel their results depend on. They're just never named as such. Reason 3. Accountability and decision authority are both clear, but they're misaligned. Someone is responsible for an outcome, but doesn't have the real levers to deliver it. Someone else can make decisions, but doesn't bear the consequences of them. This misalignment is one of the fastest generators of frustration, and probably the root cause of the deepest conflicts, because people feel that they are playing a game which is not only unwinnable, but whose rules are also unfair, because, as Orwell wrote, some are more equal than others. Reason 4. Poorly defined goals. Everyone optimizes for their own KPIs, which locally make perfect sense, but globally cancel each other out. The result? Everyone is right, each from their own perspective, and conflict is inevitable because the company is trying to go in 3 different directions at the same time. Reason 5. Information chaos. People operate on different, incomplete versions of reality. In that environment, every decision the other side makes looks like either sabotage or ignorance. Conflict doesn't erupt suddenly. It usually builds in silence. And reason 6. Constant pressure and firefighting mode as the norm. Everything is urgent. Everything is needed yesterday. There's no space to sort out the system, so people feel that the pressure isn't just temporary. They feel that whatever they do, it will stay with them. Under pressure, people have less tolerance for other people's mistakes and for suggestions that they themselves didn't deliver. They go into defensive mode much faster. They escalate much faster. And even minor things can quickly open a huge conflict. All of these root causes together lead to one outcome. People work harder and harder while the atmosphere gets denser and denser. Not because they're difficult, only because the system they're operating in is effectively forcing them into conflict. And that's exactly why team conflicts aren't solved just by talking about emotions. A conversation about emotions is needed, absolutely, but at best, it's the opening of the discussion. Team conflicts are solved by designing accountability, decision authority, information flow, and goals in such a way that there's nothing to fight for. Before we get into how to do that, let's look more closely at the CEO's role in that process. Because, as you've probably guessed, it's crucial. There's one thing worth stating very clearly. Conflict prevention doesn't mean that you as founder and CEO become the mediator, therapist, or arbitrator in every difficult conversation. Your job is not to referee arguments between grown adults, though I admit sometimes there's no way around it. But that should be the exception, not the rule. Your job is to design a system in which those arguments are simply unnecessary. Because conflict in a team most often isn't a signal that someone failed. Far more often, it's a signal that the accountability architecture, which, like everything in a startup, was built in MVP mode, has simply stopped being sufficient and needs to be upgraded. And that's a very important shift in perspective. Conflict is not a leadership failure. It's a feedback loop. It's information that says, check here whether accountability scopes are overlapping, whether decision authority is truly unambiguous, whether goals might be canceling each other out, or whether people are missing a full, consistent picture of reality. That's why the worst thing that a CEO can do is treat a conflict like a problem to be silenced, because a silenced conflict doesn't disappear. It goes underground and comes back later, louder, more personal, and far more expensive. The CEO's role is to pause and honestly ask themselves, what is this conflict trying to tell me about the management system we're operating in? Not who is right, but did we clearly assign accountability? Are decision rights consistent with accountability scopes? Can all these goals actually be maximized simultaneously? Are people working from the same picture of the situation? This is work from the meta level, and only you, as CEO, can do it because only you see the big picture. From an individual leader's perspective, these conflicts may look personal. From the CEO's perspective, they shouldn't. From the CEO's perspective, they should look like bugs or functional gaps in software, like missing pieces in the system's architecture that need to be filled in so that at the scale the system has grown to since you last designed that architecture, it can still effectively do what it was supposed to do. And that's exactly why a scaling CEO doesn't ask, how do I stop people from getting into conflict? A scaling CEO asks, how do I design the company so they don't have to? So, how do we do that? Let me walk you through it. If we compare conflict to fire, then conflict prevention comes down to creating an environment where fire doesn't have easy conditions to ignite. And even if it does happen, it will be very hard for it to spread. You can build such an environment in a few steps. Step 1. Identify the key outcomes. Before you ask who is responsible for this, you need to know what this actually means. In other words, what are the key results that genuinely need to happen in your company for everything to be moving in the right direction? Not tasks, not projects, results. It's worth approaching this top-down because in practice it significantly simplifies the accountability structure compared to the bottom-up approach. If these outcomes can't be written on one page in a few minutes, conflict is probably already lurking there. You just don't know it yet. Step 2. Assign one owner to each of those outcomes. Notice that only in this step does the question of who appear. Every key outcome from step 1 must have one end-to-end owner. Not a team, not a duo, not we'll handle this together. One person accountable for the final result, even if delivering it requires collaboration across many teams. If you can't assign one person to a result without a long explanation or a list of exceptions longer than a holiday shopping list, you already have a conflict flashpoint ready and waiting. Step 3. Pair accountability with decision authority. As I mentioned in an earlier episode, accountability without the right to decide on what actually affects the outcome is conflict in demo mode. If someone is accountable for a result, they need clearly defined decision rights, not work it out between themselves, not let me know if something comes up. Just what can this person decide on their own, where do they need approval and whose approval, and where should they simply not get involved? Otherwise, people start fighting for influence because they simply don't know how much latitude they have to act independently. Step 4. Establish what success actually means. A great many conflicts come from one simple fact. People have different definitions of a job well done. That's why conflict prevention in a team always starts with one question. How will we know that what we're doing is heading in the right direction? One specific definition, one metric for the people accountable to you, and from there you can cascade it down to others. Notice that here you're giving people two things. First, you're giving them clarity about how their work will be assessed. And second, you're giving them context. How what you expect from them fits into the bigger picture and the goal that everyone in your team is moving towards. Without that, everyone runs in a different direction, and sooner or later, everyone collides with someone else. Step 5. Design the interfaces before they start to spark. Conflicts don't grow within roles. They grow between them. That's why the key questions are: who does a given manager depend on? Whose result depends on that manager's work? Who needs what information and from whom? If these interfaces aren't named, people start operating on assumptions. And assumptions, especially under pressure, sooner or later end in friction. Step 6. Run a consistency check. Here, you make sure that the game you're inviting people to play by delegating accountability and decision authority isn't by chance a game where their chances of winning are negligible. Does each accountable person have real influence over what they're being measured on? Because if the KPI says one thing, the real levers are somewhere else, and the data needed to act isn't available when it's needed, conflict is only a matter of time. Step 7. Separate the concept of accountability from blame. Systemically, not just in declarations. This is a crucial step that ties all the others into one coherent whole. People will genuinely not take on accountability if they don't feel they can do so safely. If every problem ends with a search for who's to blame, people will hide risks, sweep things under the rug, defend their territory, and look for someone else to blame so that they don't have to carry it themselves. That's normal. That's totally human. That's why looking for someone to blame is usually a waste of time. And that's why the better question is, what in the system needs to change to prevent the same problem in the future? Because that's the question that removes the fuel from conflicts. To summarize, conflict prevention isn't about getting people to be nicer. It's about making sure they don't have to fight, because they know what they're accountable for, what they can decide, what they're measured on, and where the role ends. And equally important, they have a sense that what's expected of them isn't an unrealistic fantasy, but something that, with the resources and decision authority they have, can actually be delivered. Then conflicts either don't appear at all or burn out before they had a chance to tear your team apart. And that's exactly the moment when the company starts growing faster, because everyone is genuinely, not just declaratively, pulling in the same direction. Right, so time for some practice. Conflict prevention always starts with defining the goal that the company is trying to achieve. It's like a signpost that, in case of doubt, gives everyone a reference point. Let's say, for example, that we have a SaaS startup whose goal is to reach positive EBITDA, because that's what drives both the valuation in the next funding round and the ability to pursue venture debt as a bridge before the next round. We'll do this exactly as a scaling CEO would. Not by managing individual conflicts, but by designing a system in which conflicts do not escalate. Let's be clear about one thing up front. Positive EBITDA is a CEO level goal. We're not going to delegate accountability for EBITDA. We're going to delegate accountability for the drivers that lead to that shared goal. So, step one is the list of key business drivers. We start with the following question. What conditions must be met for positive EBITDA to be achievable? At this stage, we're not yet thinking about who delivers what. We're only focused on what needs to be delivered. Let's say that in our example, the financial model gives us the following numbers. ARR of 3.7 million, monthly ARPU of at least 11.89 euros. The number of paying customers, at least 28,500, customer acquisition cost of no more than 19 euros, and churn of no more than 5%. And then we have hard cost boundaries. Product and tech, the budget of 128,000 euros per month, business development 175,000 euros per month, including 20% revenue sharing for partners, operations 95,000 euros per month, and general administration 111. If at this stage of your company it's hard to pull numbers like these off the shelf, that's completely normal. In most growth stage startups, budgeting, financial modeling, and controlling are still things that require a lot of work. That's completely normal. Why that happens and what to do to change that, I'll tell you in episode 9 on finance. To build a system with as few flashpoints as possible, we need to start with clear identification of accountability areas. And this short list of drivers is a great starting point for building that architecture. Now, with that in hand, step 2, assigning driver owners. In today's example, we'll only go to the C-1 level, so I won't get in too much detail. In this step, for each result from the lists we've identified in step 1, you assign one specific owner. One owner, not several co-responsible people. For example, ARR, ARPU, and customer acquisition cost can be your chief revenue officer's responsibility. The number of paying users, also the CRO, because the CRO has influence over how customer acquisition looks. And in our example, also over pricing, since they are the closest person to the market. Then there's churn. And this is usually where things get complicated. Because the causes of churn can come from practically anywhere. Missing product features, software performance issues, quality of support, quality of onboarding, billing problems, pricing, or sales targeting the wrong customers in the first place. So when the conversation about churn ownership starts, there are usually no volunteers. And I completely understand why. Remember how I said people aren't comfortable taking accountability for things they can't influence? Exactly. That's why with churn, it works well to separate accountability for the process from the accountability for fixing specific churn causes. More on that in the accountability episode. In short, churn is a process, which means measurement, reporting, cause classification, and broadly directing the traffic can be owned by the COO. Fixing the specific problems that cause churn should be owned by the people who actually have influence over them. For example, churn caused by technology can be assigned to the CTO. Churn from customer-facing service issues can be assigned to the COO as the person overseeing the areas that serve the customer. Churn from targeting customers who aren't the right fit for your offer, that would be the CRO, and churn from billing issues, that could be your CFO. Obviously, this is just an example. In your company, the split may look somewhat different. The point of step 2 is to eliminate conflicts that come from ambiguity about who owns what. Then there's step 3, assigning decision authority and making sure it's consistent with the accountability that we've just assigned in step 2. And nothing stops you from involving the people you're entrusting with accountability in defining the scope of their decision rights. If you ask them, what do you need to be able to influence in order to be accountable for this metric? They will tell you. Even if the answers are inconsistent with each other or full of wishful thinking, you'll still get a very practical starting point for the conversation about alignment. In our example, decision authority might look, for example, like this. The CRO can prioritize 35% of the product roadmap, define target audience, modify offer structure and package pricing, freely choose sales channels as long as the customer acquisition cost stays below 19 euros and as long as the BizDev costs don't exceed 175,000 per month. COO can freely define the onboarding process, modify support policy, choose tools within the operations budgets, of course, and as long as product changes requested by the operations department don't exceed 10% of the roadmap. The CTO can freely define product architecture, can choose technology at their own discretion, of course within the product and tech budget. CTO can also freely prioritize 50% of the roadmap, assuming the remaining 50% is prioritized by other C-level managers. Your CFO can freely manage back-office operations within the general admin budget, as long as the quality of shared services meets the agreed standards. The CFO can also influence, for example, 5% of the product roadmap, mainly for reporting and billing purposes. In your company, this may look different, of course, but what matters is having that clarity. Because without that clarity, everyone defends their own KPIs and conflict is inevitable. Then we have step 4, establishing the success criteria. Now that you know who owns what and what they can decide, you get precise about what a good job looks like. For financially oriented goals, like the ones we started this example with, you've essentially done this work in step 1. For goals further down the chain, this is the moment to specify them. For example, churn below 5% might mean maximum 1% from support-related causes, 2% from technical causes, and, for example, 0.5% from wrong fit targeting, and so on and so on. If you don't yet have the data to establish those percentages, that's fine. Many founders don't. In that case, before setting targets, it's worth establishing first who should be collecting the data and come back to target setting once you have something to work with. From practical experience, I'd also add it's worth going through the step together with the leaders so they feel their perspective was taken into account. Step 5 is looking at the interfaces. This is where most conflicts are hiding. For example, on the business development versus tech axis, disputes often come from a gap between what the client heard as the value proposition and what can actually be delivered. The classic overpromise versus under-delivery conflict. The solution could be establishing specific quality or performance specs for the product, building a commission structure for salespeople based not on ARR, but on so-called healthy ARR, or establishing clear roadmap management principles so that sales feels confident it isn't promising the impossible, and tech feels confident that everyone understands product quality the same way. At this stage, you can say directly, I expect tension here. That's normal, it will come up. After a month, we'll look at the causes and fill in what's missing. That way, people feel that you care about building the accountability they'll be taking on principles that are simply fair. Step 6 is the consistency test. Now, you know who is accountable for what and who has what decision authority. Everyone has clarity on the goal and success criteria. You know the most important interfaces and have addressed them, at least in MVP form. Here, it's worth pausing for a moment and looking at the whole thing from altitude, asking both yourself and each area leader, does this hold together? How do leaders assess their chances of delivering within the budget and with the resources they've been given, in the time frame you're assuming? If someone says, yes, but only if X does Y, or it depends on this and that, that's a signal there may still be a potential conflict lurking somewhere, not yet fully addressed. Don't treat this as a lack of motivation or your own management failure. It's just a signal that maybe another iteration of this process might be needed. Because the conflict prevention process, through defining accountability, is rarely something you can do perfectly on the first attempt. And this brings us to step 7. Remember, conflict is not a founder's failure. It's a signal that the accountability architecture is facing another upgrade. So don't look at conflict through the lens of blame, including your own, but through the lens of the information your company is generating for you as the person who is running it. Because that approach lets you think forward, not only back. That's the approach that prevents before you have to cure. Before we close this episode, here's a small challenge for you. Choose one place in your company where you can smell conflict. Maybe it's a flashpoint that keeps coming up in meetings. Maybe it's a conflict that hasn't erupted yet, but everyone can feel it hanging in the air. Or maybe it's a hot potato that everyone is avoiding like the plague. Got one? Okay, now go through the 7 steps we've talked about today. But don't try to fix the whole world at once. Focus on this one specific conflict. Step 1. Identify the key outcome that this conflict is actually about. One sentence, one number. Don't have it? Now you know where part of the problem might be hiding. Step 2. Assign one owner to that outcome. Not a team, not we'll share it, one name. If there's more than one, you've just found a potential flashpoint. Step 3. Check whether accountability comes paired with decision authority. Can this person actually change what influences this result? If not, you've just found a conflict trigger. You can ask that person what they need to operate more effectively. Step 4. Define what a good job means. How will everyone know that things are as they should be? And how will they know that they are not? Do your people understand this the same way? If not, another trigger found. Step 5. Look at the interfaces with other areas. Where does this accountability area touch someone else's? Does this person need information they're not getting on time? Something feels off? Congratulations! Now you know where another potential source of conflict might be lurking. Step 6. Check the consistency of goals, KPIs, accountability scopes, decision authority, access to the information. Not the people, the system. Something out of sync? Another trigger found. And finally, step 7. Before you talk to people, consciously separate accountability from blame. Not who should face consequences, but who has what to fix. Because if people feel that the conversation about this outcome is nothing more than blame shifting, you've got the next conflict already in the bank. Now that you can see where the conflict might have come from, you know which part of your management system needs an update. So go back to the first step where you hit a landmine and try to redefine it to diffuse it. Good luck! Let me know in the comments how it went. In the next episode of Founder to Zero, we'll talk about something that's enormously valuable for every startup. Startup culture. We'll talk about what it really is, what it definitely isn't, and how to make sure that company growth and the inevitable tidying up of management that comes with it don't kill the energy that draws people to work in startups in the first place. If you'd like to look more closely at the conflict flashpoints in your own team, or explore what working together one-on-one might look like to upgrade your accountability architecture, you'll find the contact link below this video. And if this episode was useful, leave a comment, like, share, subscribe. It genuinely helps me make more content like this. That's it for today. Take care and see you in the next episode.